Welcome everyone to today's Flock Talk. I'm Dr. Patrick Biggs with Purina Animal Nutrition. We're going to spend the next 20-30 minutes talking about ducks today. We've seen this, we've done this before. We've done this with chickens. We know that a lot of you out there now have ducks. You're starting to get some other animals. So we wanted to take this opportunity to kind of reach out and kind of tell you what we know about ducks and what you're going to need to know to get started with those ducks. So I see a lot of you starting to posting. We got people from all over. Teresa in Florida, Patricia in Indiana, Ethel in Georgia, Tina saying hello. We got Debbie in Arizona. So as we go through this, if you have questions, post those in the comments. I'll be following along and we'll answer those kind of as we go through this. Ducks are really great. They're very unique personalities. They're great animals to have to kind of add some variety to your flock. They are really easy to care for. And, if you're already raising birds, whether it's chickens, you don't need a whole lot of other special equipment, to raise those birds. They're really kind of what you might have around the house or for brooding and raising chickens. You can also use a lot of that stuff for your ducks. Now, there is also some seasonal availability coming with ducks and geese. So, if you want those birds, typically the spring, this time of year is really kind of the best time to get those birds. You're going to start to see those in the next few months. The breeding flocks come into production, eggs are going to be more available. Typically, we haven't seen, in the past, we haven't seen a lot of availability with ducks and geese, especially with eggs. In the summer and in the fall. However, we are seeing that change a little bit. Hatcheries are doing a better job of keeping those birds in production for a longer period of times and having hatchable eggs available on a more year-round basis. But typically, springtime is really the best time to get started with those birds. All right, let's go to the next. There we go. There are lots of different breed differences that you can have, just like chickens or dogs and cats. There's a wide variety of breeds to look for. Body sizes vary. You can get ducks that are full grown or 1.5 pounds. They're tiny little things all the way up to 12 pounds. You're 1.5 pounds. You're looking at like call ducks. 12 pounds, you're probably getting more into the Muscovy duck. So there's a wide variety of types that you're going to have. And in those varieties, you're also going to decide kind of what you want. Are you wanting something that's just pretty to look at, fun to watch, quack and swim and do whatever that ducks do? Do you want something that's going to give you lots of eggs? There are, a couple of breeds of ducks that will lay eggs, a similar amount to what you might actually get with chickens, where you can actually get up to about 300 eggs per year with those chickens. The Khaki Campbells are really great egg producers. They'll lay eggs almost year round, similar to what a chicken will do. Those are really, the Khaki Campbells are your top egg producers. The others don't typically lay that. Probably the max for most of the other breeds are going to be in that 200 egg range, if they are geared more towards egg production. And then those that are kind of more ornamental and more meat oriented are certainly going to be on that low end in that 20 to maybe 100 egg range, depending on what type of chicken. So, think about, do you want those chickens just because they're pretty? Do you want to get meat from those birds? Or do you just want eggs from those birds? So there's a lot of different varieties, and you see when you range in body size from 1.5 pounds up to 12 pounds, you can get quite a variety. One thing that you're going to have to kind of think about with some of these birds is, will they fly away? And for the most part, most backyard ducks aren't going to be great flyers because most of them are on the heavier side, and so they're not really geared towards flight. You're going to find more problems as you get into those smaller birds, the call ducks, mallards, anything kind of in that 2 to 4 pound range tend to be a little better flyers. So you may have to take some steps to maybe trim flight feathers to keep them from flying away. Or you may just raise some of these birds just because you want to kind of, grow them. Maybe you want to raise some mallard ducks so that in 4 or 5 months, when they've started to hit maturity, they can fly off and go live their life out in the wild. There are certainly, that's certainly a possibility. But do remember, if you are going to trim flight feathers, make sure that you're trimming the right flight feathers. And then, realize too that as you trim those flight feathers, that's also going to make them more susceptible to predation. Even those larger birds that aren't great flyers, they can still get up off the ground and they can, get away from predators if that is an issue. But if you remove those flight feathers, trim those off so that they can no longer fly, you have to be a little more attentive as they're out roaming around, because that's going to certainly make them more susceptible to predation. And keep in mind too that trimming flight feathers is not a permanent solution. So those flight feathers will grow back. Every time those birds molt, they're going to shed those feathers that you've trimmed off, and you're going to have to cut those again kind of every year. So certainly if that's a concern, then that's a great way to go about doing that. All right. Yeah. Oh, we've got some pop quizzes. I forgot to mention we are going to have some pop quizzes throughout here, throughout this presentation. So pay attention. We're going to ask the question, and then post the answer to the question in the comment section. And then we'll get to the first person that we see answered that question correctly. We'll get in touch with you, and we'll get you a swag bag, a prize package of some sort. So let's see what do we got for our first pop quiz questions. How many eggs can you expect from a Khaki Campbell duck? Now remember, I said this is probably one of the better egg producing breeds of ducks out there. So how many eggs do you think? There we go. Oh, look at that. Natalia is quick on the draw. Oh, she got it with the first one. I've seen lots of, that's right. I see lots of Natalia. I think Natalia got it first. Let's see. And then, yes, Natalia. And then, Tina got it. Kathy, there's lots of right answers. So 300 eggs per year is about what you can expect with a Khaki Campbell duck when she does come into production and start really maximizing that egg production. So great job on that. And let's go back to let's learn some more about ducks. So brooding, that's really the first stage. That's the process of getting those ducks home, right after they've hatched, and raising them into, adult ducks. Now, if you're familiar with raising chickens, the process is really the same. We're going to probably keep them indoors for several weeks where we can control the environment a little bit more. We can keep the area warm for them. We can confine them in a space where we have food and water readily available for them all the time. It's about a 5 to 6 week period. And I will say too, the picture here is actually, the topic is really around ducks, but we've got here a Sebastopol goose here. And so ducks and geese, a lot of this really applies to them. They're going to be pretty similar in kind of everything we talk about. So I'm going to focus on ducks, but a lot of what I say is also going to apply to geese as well. So if you want to get those, there are certainly options there. So you're going to keep those birds, ducks and geese are going to grow faster than your chickens. A duck is nearly full grown at about 7 to 8 weeks of age, whereas chickens take, a few more months to kind of hit that mark. So your birds are going to grow faster. And especially if you get some of the larger ducks, the more commercial size, or, even the meatier ducks that in that 8 to 12 pound range, they're going to be almost full size in about 42 days. So they grow really fast. So it's important we get the right food in them, but then also consider where you're keeping them, how you're going to expand that out. And so it takes about a couple of weeks for those birds to really start growing some feathers. You're going to keep the temperature a little warmer for the birds, probably around 90 degrees Fahrenheit for those birds when they first hatch. And then you can lower that temperature as needed. Again, always kind of rely on the birds to really tell you what the temperature needs to be. So if you find them crowding under a heat source, it probably needs to be a little warmer. But if they're avoiding that heat source, then you can cool that off. Let's see what else we got here. So mess, ducks are going to make more of a mess than what chickens might be. So you're probably going to have to change the litter a little more often with ducks. They do tend to be messier. If you have open containers of water in the brooding area, the ducks are going to play in it. They're going to splash around in it. If it's large enough that they can get in it, they are going to get in it, sit in it, splash around in it. I certainly don't recommend, especially if it's cold outside, we like to give the ducks probably about 4 weeks before we really give them an opportunity to get into water. Prior to that, their feathers aren't quite there to keep them warm. So, giving them access to a swimming area too early can lead to chilling of those ducks and can lead to some illness from that. So if you are going to offer a swimming area for the ducks, very early on in life, make sure you've got a place to warm them up, dry them off, especially during those first couple of weeks. But after about 4 to 5 weeks, those ducks are going to be feathered enough where they can start getting in water. They'll be insulated. That you can take them outside at that point, especially if it's cold outside. They can tolerate colder temperatures at that point. So ducks and geese are going to progress from the indoor brooding stage to the outdoor stage and be a little more tolerant of the colder weather a little faster than what chickens are. But your birds will certainly be much messier than the chickens. And then as far as your feeders and waters, make sure you got plenty of those in there. Make sure that they're covered. You're going to raise those up, for the ducks and geese as they grow. So make sure you're keeping it at about chest height for those birds as they grow. All right. It's nice to see. Bill is very happy about Purina feed. So thanks for joining us, Bill. Food and water. Let's talk about that. We want to make sure that we're giving the animals the right feed so that they can get the right nutrition so they can grow and develop properly. So our duck product, the Purina duck feed pellets, is specifically designed for ducks to grow and develop, especially from hatch. You're going to basically, and the nice thing about Purina duck feed is it's a feed that you can offer to your birds from hatch all the way through their entire life process. So you don't have to change feed with your ducks if you don't want to. The one exception to that is going to be when your ducks do hit egg production. Once they start laying eggs, we're going to need to provide some extra oyster shell for those birds. So adding a source of oyster shell in the coop for those ducks will certainly provide the added calcium that they need to get to that egg production if you're not going to be switching them to a layer feed that's specific for ducks. But there's 38 different nutrients that those birds need on a regular basis. And if you're familiar with ducks, you know that niacin is a big nutrient requirement for ducks, because the niacin requirement for ducks is much higher than it is for chickens. So that's why we don't recommend feeding chick feed to ducks, because one, the nutrients aren't the same. So the duck feed has the niacin in the feed to meet that requirement for the ducks, so they're not going to have leg problems. So the duck feed is really intended to be fed to those ducks and provide all the nutrition that they need to get those ducks, from day 0 all the way up until end of life at that point. So that's what we want to do for feed. I think we have another pop quiz. So if you are ready, let's see. How long should ducks eat Purina duck feed? There you go. Let's see. Post those answers in the. There we go. I see we got some. I think I got Tina Zeller's Pace might be our winner. There you go. And that's what my team in the background says. So yes, you can feed that to your birds for their entire life. So it's very simple when it comes to feeding ducks with this. Let's see. I thought I saw a question. So I think Natalia asked a question earlier about if you keep ducks and chickens together, can they eat the same feed? So I just want to clarify, if the feed is medicated, if the chicken feed is medicated, you don't want to feed that to your ducks. The medicated starter that is available for chickens is not appropriate for ducks. That medication is not approved for use in ducks. So you can cause some harm if you allow your ducks to eat the same medicated feed as your chickens. As far as feeding a non-medicated chick starter, it's not great, especially during the first couple of weeks because ducks grow much faster than chickens. They do have higher protein, higher energy requirements, higher amino acid requirements than what chickens do. And then, like I said, niacin is always a concern because ducks do have a higher niacin requirement than what chickens do. So that starter feed may not necessarily be great for them, especially when it comes in terms of niacin and some of the other nutrients. So ideally, if you're going to house chickens and ducks together, especially early on in life, I would recommend if you want to feed one feed, feed the chickens also the duck feed as well. Just remember the duck feed is only available in pellets. It is a mini pellet, but it may be too large for baby chicks to eat. It should be large enough for most ducks to eat it. Call ducks may be a little too small. You may have for maybe about the first week, you may have to kind of mash up some of those pellets a little smaller for those tiny ducks during that first week. But after that, they grow fast enough they should start being able to get to eating those pellets. All right. Great question. Let's move on to water. Water is certainly an important part to the birds, and we want to make sure that ducks have access to water. They want to have it all the time. Ducks are going to drink a little bit more than what chickens might need. You don't need a swimming area for your ducks. It's a nice to have, but it's not a need to have. When it comes to water, plenty of water. And like I said, you want to have at least one container that the birds can dip their heads into, at least to cover their eyes, because that's how they clean their faces and keep their eyes clean of bacteria and other things. So if you see a lot of kind of gunk accumulating around the duck's eyes, they probably don't have a place to kind of clean their faces off well enough. So you may need to provide some sort of container that they can at least dip their beak and their face into to kind of keep that clean. But there's always a trade-off. You don't want to make it so large that they're going to want to try and get in it and swim in it and make a mess in there. So it's a bit of a trade-off. You got to figure out what works best for you and your ducks. And if nothing is showing wrong with those eyes and that, then you're doing everything right. Like I said, when it comes to water and swimming area, with the pools, we certainly don't want to. We want to wait a couple of weeks, especially if the temperature outside is chillier. With those birds, waiting until about 4 weeks of age before you offer them a place to swim would be best. Just realize that ducks are very messy. And if you don't, you're going to have to clean out that swimming area, that swimming water, especially if you're using some sort of like kiddie pool or water trough or something small like that. Those birds, they're going to get in it. They're going to go to the bathroom in it. They're going to make it a terrible mess very quickly. And so having your birds swim in kind of that dirty water, it's unappealing because, especially you have white feathered birds, those white feathers don't stay white for very long. And then it's also an accumulation of bacteria and other things that is just unsanitary. And overall, it doesn't make a great environment for the birds and for the people that are caring for the birds to be in. So if you are going to have some sort of small contained area for the birds to swim in, remember you're going to need to change that water fairly regularly if you're going to let them in there. All right. Let's see if there's anything. All right. Isabel is saying that her ducks are laying eggs in the water. And is that normal? That's very unusual. It's not common for ducks to lay eggs in water. I'm not sure why they're doing that. Usually, for the most part, ducks are going to lay their eggs on the ground. Chickens like to lay their eggs in some sort of nesting box. However, ducks are going to prefer their nesting areas to be on the ground. They're not going to get up into a nest box to lay eggs. They're typically going to lay their eggs on the ground. I'm not sure, Isabel, why your ducks have decided to lay their eggs in water, because that's certainly not conducive to anything. If you're laying a fertile egg in water, unfortunately, that's not going to be great for that baby duck to hatch out, and it's not going to develop well. So so I'm not sure. You figure out what is there not enough room in there for the ducks. I don't know. There's a lot of things that could go in there. So just look at the environment and see if there's something that is kind of forcing those birds to lay their eggs in the water as opposed to kind of on the land. Yeah, and Susan brings up a good point. It could be if they're laying their eggs near the edge of water or pond or whatever it might be, they might be getting knocked in there by mistake. All right. So back to food, water, treats. You can treat your birds. There are some options out there. The Purina farm to flock treats can be fed to your birds. It's a great way to provide a little extra nutrition for your birds. Just realize that we want to limit the amount of treats that your birds are getting because especially when they're young, those first several weeks, those birds are growing really fast, and it's important that they get the right nutrition. And the feed is a complete feed. It provides all the nutrition that those birds need on a daily basis. So anytime that we start supplementing other things, treats, mealworms, table scraps, whatever it might be, we start to dilute out the nutrition in the feed, and then those birds aren't getting the right nutrition. We like to follow a 90-10 rule, saying that 90% of their birds' daily intake is coming from a complete feed product, which Purina duck feed is. And then the other 10% of their intake can come from things like mealworms and table scraps and treats, scratch grains, any of those things. So keep that in mind. With ducks, especially young, it's only a tablespoon or two is kind of what makes up that 10%. As they get a little older, get more to adult stage, it's probably in that 2 to 3 tablespoons per day is really what's an appropriate amount of feed for ducks. So we want to make sure that we're always following that rule because we want your birds to be healthy, and I want you to realize that we like to spoil our animals with other treats, but realize that the feed is complete, so it provides all the nutrition that they need on a regular basis. Just because you and I don't want to eat the same thing every day, birds don't have that same attachment to kind of getting that variety in life. They want the nutrition that they need today to get them tomorrow, and maybe even produce the next generation of birds from there. So keep that in mind as you're kind of spoiling your birds with some of these treats. All right, another pop quiz. All right, get your fingers ready. Our question is, what percentage of an adult duck's diet should be treats? Should be, could be treats. How much treats? What do we want to give those birds? Oh, there we go. I think Isabel is on top of it now. I think she got this 10%. Kind of keep that in mind as you're feeding those birds, and that's with any birds that you might have. 10% is really kind of the number that we want to be. You can spoil your birds, but just realize as you feed more and more of things that aren't a complete feed, you're diluting that nutrition, and then you're creating an environment that maybe isn't great for those birds, especially once they get to kind of egg production stage. You might be diluting the amount of calcium that they're getting in their daily diet, and they may not get enough, so that eggshells start to get thinner, egg production starts to go down, and then you run into some issues there. So the feed is really what's intended for those birds. The treats are just that. They are a treat and should be fed in moderation. All right. Biosecurity, let's talk about that. Ducks are fairly resistant to diseases and parasites. So as long as you're doing a good job of keeping the environment clean, you should be doing a great job of not having many health issues for those birds. And we certainly want to make sure that we're limiting the exposure to wild birds and waterfowl. Wild birds carry diseases that can be passed to your birds. Avian influenza is becoming a bigger problem again. We're starting to see some outbreaks around the U.S. Some wild birds are getting that. There's actually been a case of some wild birds transmitting avian influenza to a backyard flock. So we're starting to see more of that. As you let your birds interact with the wildlife population, there is risk of your birds catching something, avian influenza or some other disease from those birds. And there's no medicated feed for ducks. There are no over-the-counter medications for ducks and geese. So There's no vaccinations for them. So if your ducks do get sick, you're going to need to work with a veterinarian to figure out what's wrong with the ducks and then to figure out an appropriate plan for that. Now, so keep the housing, keep the water clean, do what you can to keep everything. Ducks are going to be messy. Those big webbed feet, they splatter everything everywhere. If you've got them in a grassy area, it's not going to be grassy for very long. If you give them, like in this image, you can see a bit of a pond in their run area. They're going to make a mess. They're going to splash water everywhere. So it's certainly going to be, moisture is going to be more of an issue, and muddy ground is going to be more of an issue with ducks than it is with some of the other animals that are out there. All right. What is our next slide? Mixed flocks. Some of you may be raising flocks with multiple bird species out there. This is where it gets complicated because I know everybody wants one diet that kind of feeds everything. And although they are all birds, their requirements aren't all the same. So it does get a bit complicated. If like in this image, we've got the turkey, we've got a duck, and we've got a chicken here. When they get started, starting the birds off is the biggest challenge. Kind of those first 8 weeks is really when we struggle more with what to feed those birds. Once we get closer to an adult stage, then it certainly becomes much easier to feed those birds. If you have turkeys, game birds, pheasants, quail, I saw somebody earlier asked about peacocks. You're going to start those birds, turkeys, game birds, peacocks, on game bird starter. It's a much higher protein feed, 30% protein. That's going to target what the requirements of those birds are much better than what duck feed or flock raiser or the chick starter is going to be. Ducks and geese, flock raiser or duck feed pellets, that 19 to 20% protein range is targeting what those birds need. And with chickens, ideally the 18% starter is what's best for those birds. And then when you get into medicated feeds, that becomes more complicated because chickens and turkeys and pheasants can have amprolium in their diets, but the other birds can't. So if you're looking for something that's non-medicated, flock raiser would be something that's going to hit more of those birds. You could feed your ducks and chickens flock raiser or the duck feed pellets early on in life. Size of the birds is certainly going to be an issue. So we want to make sure that, especially with chickens, we want to make sure that they're large enough to eat those pellets. With game birds, turkeys, pheasants, quail, chuckers, peacocks, peafowl, the first 8 weeks, they need to be on that starter grower. But after that 8 weeks, then you can switch them to flock raiser feed in that 20% range. And then as your chickens get to that 18-week range, you can feed everybody flock raiser. Just realize as birds head into production, calcium is going to be an issue because the birds that are laying eggs need the added calcium for egg production, whereas the birds that aren't laying eggs don't need that. So male birds don't need all the added calcium that's in layer feed. So it gets to be complicated as you're adding a variety of birds in your flock. But for the most part, your flock raiser is kind of your go-to for the adult birds. And then if you have birds that are going to be laying eggs and you're not offering a layer feed in there, then having that supplemental container of oyster shell out there for the ladies to get the added calcium that they need to kind of support egg production. So it does get to be a bit complicated as you start adding a variety, because I know everybody wants one feed to feed everything, but that's not always great. Byron is asking about all flock, good for ducks. I guess in terms of what Purina has to offer, flock raiser is going to meet duck requirements. It's 20% protein, the vitamins, minerals, the nutrients. It has the amount of niacin in there that ducks need. So that is certainly an option that you can feed to ducks from hatch all the way through the end of life. All right. What do we have next? Another pop quiz. All in addition to flock raiser, what should you feed your flock, a mixed flock, if they are laying eggs? All right. What have we got? Oh, there it is. Teresa's paying attention. I like it. She's oyster shell. Yeah, so we want to make sure that we have oyster shell. Now realize, certainly adding that oyster shell separately is something that we can do because birds are pretty good about eating to meet nutrient requirements. And so the ladies that are making eggs, laying eggs, realize that they're just not getting the calcium content that they need in their regular diet. So they do start looking for other sources of calcium. And so that's why we can put oyster shell out there and let those ladies go get the added calcium that they need. And then for the most part, the males and birds that aren't laying eggs are going to avoid that. So that's a great way to kind of ensure that everybody's getting the right nutrition without getting too much calcium. If we're feeding everybody a layer feed, everybody's getting more calcium than what they need. And not all birds that lay eggs are going to lay at that high rate that a chicken would need. Chickens, it's about 3.5% calcium is what we recommend for a layer feed. Whereas with turkeys and game birds and ducks that tend to be a little more seasonal, it's only about 2.5 to 3% calcium that those birds need. And then you're going to find a lot of the turkeys, geese, ducks, game birds aren't going to lay year round. They're certainly more seasonal. You're going to see them come into production, in the spring, and then as they get closer to winter and the days start getting shorter, egg production really tapers off. And for some of those breeds that only lay 20 to 40 eggs a year, it's really a small window of when you're going to get eggs from those birds. And I will say most ducks are going to kind of hit egg production around 26 weeks of age. So they do take a little longer to hit that sexual maturity. They can start laying eggs. So with chickens, it's around 18 to 20 weeks. Ducks, it's 16 to 20 weeks. For those birds. And then, and Susan's, I guess, clarifying with the oyster shell here. Yes, I would recommend not mixing your oyster shell in with the feed. Just put it as a separate container. The hens will go get the oyster shell out of that container, and then everybody else will just eat out of that. It's certainly going to cut down on the amount of waste of oyster shell as the birds eat the pellets and whatever else in there. They may not necessarily eat all the oyster shells, so you may get accumulation if you're mixing everything together. Keeping them separate helps allow the birds to kind of adjust what they need on a regular bit. Yes. All right. What do we got next? Well, that kind of wraps up what I have. That was a very short kind of introduction to what we have on, how to manage and raise ducks. You can see at the bottom, we have a flock resource center at purinamills.com/chick-days. You can go on there. There's much more information. We have a pamphlet that goes into a little more detail about chicken or about ducks and geese, or at least ducks, on what it takes to kind of raise them, give you a little more detail, kind of many of the things that we've just discussed that you can download and kind of read at your leisure. And I appreciate, thanks for listening. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks to those that participated in the quizzes. For those of you that were winners, we'll be in touch with you to kind of get your information so that we can get something sent out to you. So I appreciate it, everybody, and have a great day.